The wind howled through the Pecos desert, carrying dust, heat, and the sound of something human, a broken gasp tangled in the storm. Samantha Doyle hung from a cottonwood tree that had forgotten how to give shade. Her wrists were bound high above her head, skin rubbed raw against the coarse rope. Each breath tore through her throat like glass. The sun had burned everything, her lips, her strength, her will, but not her fear. She tried to lift herself, to find the ground, but her toes met only shifting sand. The wind pushed her sideways, the rope bit deeper, and a small cry escaped before she could stop it. It wasn't a scream anymore, just the sound of someone trying not to disappear. She didn't remember when they left her. The laughter, the smell of whiskey, the hoofbeats fading into nothing, it all blurred into one long silence. They'd called her cargo, not a person, said she'd fetch a good price in El Paso. But when they thought the law might be near, they'd tied her here instead, a warning to anyone who followed. Now the desert was her jury. Flies circled her face. The sun showed no mercy.
Every minute stretched like an hour, and she wondered how long it took for a soul to burn. Then something changed. The wind shifted, curling low through the dry brush, and in that whisper she heard her own name. Not from memory, not from madness. It was out there, carried by the desert itself. Her cracked lips moved, barely sound at all. Please, someone. For a heartbeat, even the wind held its breath. And miles away, a rancher paused by the fence line, hat low, lantern flickering in his hand, certain that he had just heard a woman's voice call his name through the storm. But someone heard her name in the wind. Before we find out what happens next, tell me, what time is it where you're listening from? And if you want to ride along for more tales of courage, subscribe now. Now, let's see what waited for them in the dark. Eli Mercer hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. The desert didn't ask for conversation, just work, sweat, and silence. He liked it that way. Out here, nothing judged him for what he'd done or who he'd lost. Only the wind remembered. That evening, the sky burned the color of rust and blood.
Eli was mending the fence near the dry creek bed when the wind shifted, sudden, sharp, and something inside it made him freeze. It wasn't a coyote, not the cry of a bird. It was softer, human, a whisper cutting through miles of empty air. He lifted the lantern higher, the flame trembled. "No," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "Ain't no one out there." But the whisper came again, this time clearer, a name, his name, carried by the storm. Eli's boots sank deep into the sand as he followed the sound. Each step echoed against the vast silence. Then she saw her, a pale figure swaying from the old cottonwood tree, her hair tangled like smoke, her body limp but still breathing. For a long moment he didn't move. The desert had shown him horrors before, soldiers left on battlefields, families burned in raids. But this was different. This was cruelty done slow, deliberate. He drew the knife from his belt, sliced through the rope. The woman collapsed into his arms, her body trembling, eyes fluttering open. Her voice cracked. "They left me for dead." "Easy," Eli said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "You're safe now." She tried to speak again, but only air came out. So he tore his coat from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, feeling how cold her skin had become under that burning sun. When she looked up, her eyes met his, blue, glassy, lost. There was fear there, but something else too, the faint glimmer of trust. Eli swallowed hard. He didn't want this, didn't want another ghost to follow him. But the wind had brought her here, same as it once brought him. He glanced toward the horizon, nothing but sand and sky, yet he could feel it, the unseen eyes watching, the echo of hooves carried by the wind. "Who did this to you?" he asked quietly. Her lips moved. "Men with a mark, a V." Eli's hand tightened on the lantern handle.
The flame wavered, throwing wild shadows across his face. He knew that mark. He'd seen it before, carved into barns, branded on flesh, left behind like a curse. He lifted her gently, her weight light as sorrow, and started back toward the ranch. Each step stirred the dust, and behind him the dying sun bled into the clouds. He didn't look back. Some things in the desert were better left unseen.
But as he crossed the threshold of his lonely homestead, a single thought gnawed at him. He had no idea that saving her would cost him everything. The night came heavy over Pecos, thick with dust and dread. Inside the cabin, firelight trembled across the wooden walls. Samantha lay on the cot near the open window, the same rope marks still fresh on her wrists. Eli sat by the table, sharpening his old rifle with slow, steady strokes. He hadn't said much since bringing her back, and the silence between them felt almost alive. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "They called themselves the Vultures." Eli's hand froze. The whetstone stopped mid-drag. "They took me from the trail," she continued. "We were headed west, a wagon train. They rode in at night, torches, guns, laughter. They said they'd sell me to a saloon in El Paso." Her eyes shimmered with the reflection of the fire. "One of them wore a chain with a coin carved like a V. He said they'd done this before." Eli's jaw tightened. He set the rifle down and stood, walking to the door. "You're sure about that mark?" She nodded slowly. Outside, the desert wind moaned through the posts. Eli lifted his lantern, scanning the old cottonwood tree by the fence line. On its trunk, black and scorched, was the letter V, burned deep into the bark. He'd seen it once before, years ago. The same men had taken everything from him, his wife, his child, his faith in the law. He thought they were long gone. Now the past had ridden straight to his doorstep. Behind him, Samantha whispered, "You know them?" He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed to the barn, his boots crunching against the dry earth. Inside, he checked the stockpile. 2 rifles, a box of cartridges, 3 lanterns, 1 worn saddle. His fingers brushed over the scar on his shoulder, a memory of the Vulture's last visit. Then, faintly, it came. That sound no desert man mistakes. Hoofbeats, distant, slow, too many to be a lone traveler. Eli blew out the lantern and rushed back inside. "They're coming," he said. Samantha sat up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Now?" He grabbed her by the shoulders, firm, not cruel. "You're going below." "There's nowhere to go." He pulled the rug aside, revealing a trapdoor hidden beneath the floorboards. The cellar below was dark, cold, lined with barrels and dust. "Stay down there. Don't make a sound until I come for you." "I'm not leaving you out here." "You already did once," he said quietly, and that stopped her. Not anger, just truth. She swallowed hard, then nodded. "If they find you, they won't." He helped her down the ladder, handed her a small lantern. "Keep this low, breathe quiet." Before closing the hatch, he added softly, "Whatever happens, don't come up till the wind stops." When the trapdoor shut, Eli stood alone again. The air felt thicker now, charged. He moved to the door, bolting the shutters, checking every lock. Then he set the rifle on the table, poured one last cup of coffee, and took a slow breath. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, rolling like thunder over the flats. Shadows moved beyond the fence line. Eli looked to the window, eyes hard. "You picked the wrong man's land," he muttered. He took position by the door, rifle ready, breath steady. The fire crackled low, throwing his shadow tall against the wall. For a brief moment he thought of his daughter's laughter, the sound the desert had stolen long ago. Tonight it was coming back for more.
He thought he'd saved her. But this was only the beginning of a darker fight. The storm rolled in like an army, wind first, then sand, then the hiss of rain that never quite fell. Lightning flashed far off, splitting the horizon in half. Every crack of thunder felt closer than the last. Eli Mercer stood on the porch, rifle pressed against his shoulder, eyes fixed on the black horizon. The desert smelled of metal and dust, the kind that came before blood. Inside, the fire burned low, but the heat of it barely touched the chill that crawled up his spine. The hoofbeats were steady now, not the rush of a chase, but the march of men who already believed they owned the night. The vultures had come back. He counted them by sound. 4, maybe 5. Then, in the space between thunder, he heard laughter. Familiar, slow, drawled with the same cruel ease he remembered. "Eli Mercer," a voice called from the dark. "Didn't think I'd see you again out here." Eli didn't answer. He knew that voice. Reed Calloway, a man he'd once called brother back when the war still made men choose sides. Reed had chosen gold over honor, and now he rode with thieves.
"Come on out, Eli," Reed shouted, his tone casual but sharp underneath. "We just want the girl. You give her up, and maybe we let you keep what's left of that lonely ranch." Eli's thumb brushed the trigger guard. "You ever think about what you're saying, Reed?" His voice was low, almost calm. "You're standing in front of the same door you burned once before." Lightning tore open the sky. For a second, Eli saw them clearly. 5 riders, faces wrapped in scarves, eyes shining with that hollow kind of greed. The letter V branded on one man's saddle. The first shot came from the dark, splintering the porch post inches from Eli's head. He dropped low, returned fire, the echo tearing through the storm. The night exploded into chaos, gunfire, shouts, the smell of sulfur and rain. Down below, in the cellar, Samantha flinched at every shot. Dust rained from the beams overhead. She clutched the small lantern, whispering the same prayer she'd heard her father say in every storm. "Lord, guide the kind and blind the cruel." She wanted to believe the sound of thunder was drowning out the battle. But one gunshot came too close. Then silence. Too long. Too still.
Above, Eli ducked behind the water trough, reloading. His hands were steady, but his breath wasn't. He could see one of the men crawling toward the barn. Another circled left. Reed stood tall by the fence, shouting over the storm. "You ain't gonna win this, Eli. You can't fight what you buried." Eli wiped the rain from his brow. "I already did." A shadow moved behind him. One of the men had flanked the porch. The door burst open. A shot cracked. The man stumbled back, clutching his chest. Eli turned in time to see Samantha standing at the trapdoor, lantern in one hand, trembling pistol in the other. Her eyes were wide, terrified. I heard him behind you." He took the gun from her, set it aside. "You shouldn't have come up. You shouldn't fight alone." For a moment, they just looked at each other, the world outside still roaring. Then Reed's voice broke through again. "Guess the stories were true," he shouted. "You keep saving people who don't belong to you." The words hit harder than the rain. Eli stepped off the porch, rifle raised. "And I'll keep doing it till the Lord says I can stop." The next exchange of gunfire was fierce, close. 2 men fell.
Reed's horse screamed and reared. Lightning illuminated his face, older now, twisted with rage and regret. Eli's rifle jammed. He dove behind the corral, pulling his revolver just as Reed fired again. The bullet tore through Eli's shoulder. He grunted, fell against the mud, blood mixing with the rain. Samantha screamed his name and ran to him, dragging him toward the cabin. He pushed her down behind the doorframe, breathing hard. "Stay down. Don't let them take you." Through the haze of pain, Eli saw Reed reload, the last bullet glinting in the lightning. He aimed for the window. Then Samantha's voice cut through the wind, trembling but clear. "Mercy is heavier than lead." The words froze Reed for just a moment, enough for Eli to fire first. The shot rang out, grazing Reed's arm and knocking him backward into the mud. The rest of the gang scattered into the storm. Horses panicked. The night swallowed their shouts one by one. And then, silence again. Eli leaned against the wall, breathing through the pain, watching Reed crawl away into the darkness. He could have finished it, he should have, but he didn't. He lowered the gun, his voice breaking. "Go, Reed. Don't come back." When the wind finally calmed, Samantha pressed a torn strip of cloth against his shoulder. Her hands shook, but her eyes didn't. "You let him live." Eli nodded. Killing him wouldn't change what's already gone. Outside, the rain thinned into dust. The fire crackled again, softer now. The night had tested them both, faith, fear, and the weight of forgiveness. But the night wasn't done testing them. Dawn was still hours away. The fire inside the cabin had burned down to coals, and every shadow looked like a man waiting to strike. Eli sat slumped against the wall, his shoulder wrapped in a strip of his own shirt. The bleeding had slowed, but the pain was deep, the kind that doesn't fade when the body stops moving. Samantha knelt beside him, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of hooves retreating into the hills. But one voice remained, a low groan near the corral. Eli pushed himself upright. "Stay here." He stepped outside, rifle in hand, boots sinking into the wet dust. The world smelled of rain and smoke. There, half buried in mud, lay one of the vultures, a young man, barely 20. The letter V was branded into his coat, but his hands shook like he'd never fired a gun before. When the boy saw Eli, he raised a trembling hand. "Don't shoot, please, I didn't want to." Eli leveled the rifle anyway, his jaw clenched. "You rode with them. You tied her to that tree." "I tried to stop 'em," the boy gasped. "They said if I didn't, they'd hang me too." His voice cracked under the weight of his words. "I didn't think she'd still be alive." Eli's finger hovered near the trigger. The desert was quiet except for the ragged breath of the wounded man. Lightning flickered far off, casting long shadows over both their faces, the sinner and the man who once swore never to forgive another. Samantha appeared at the doorway. "Eli." He didn't turn. "You said," she whispered, "no one deserves to die alone." The words hummed in the air like a prayer. For a moment, the wind itself seemed to pause, waiting for his choice. Eli lowered the rifle, eyes burning, not from rage, but from something heavier. "You ride to Fort Rock," he said. "Tell the marshal what happened. Tell him Eli Mercer is sending you alive." The boy stared in disbelief. "You're letting me go?" "I'm letting justice do what I can't." The young man nodded weakly, dragging himself toward a stray horse grazing by the fence. Before mounting, he looked back once, his face pale under the moonlight. "Thank you." Eli didn't answer. He just watched until the figure disappeared into the desert haze. When he turned back toward the cabin, the sound came. Sharp, sudden, a single gunshot from the darkness. The boy's horse bolted. Eli staggered, the world spinning. The bullet had caught him low in the side, not fatal, but deep. He dropped to one knee, hand pressed against the wound. From the far ridge, Reed Calloway's voice echoed. "Mercy don't save anyone, Eli." Then came the retreating thunder of hooves fading into dawn. Samantha rushed out, catching Eli before he fell. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed down on the wound. "Stay with me! Eli, look at me!" He managed a weak smile. "Guess I ain't done learning." She dragged him back inside, every step a fight against gravity. On the table, she found the same strip of linen he'd once used to bind her wrists. Carefully, she tore it in half, pressing it against his wound. "Hold still," she whispered.
He winced, breath shallow. "That's my bandage." "It's ours now," she said firmly. The firelight trembled over her hands, steady, determined. She worked fast, whispering the same prayer he'd muttered over her days ago. "Lord, give strength to the willing." Eli's eyes met hers, tired but alive. "You could have run." "And leave you here to prove them right?" Her voice shook. "No, not this time." When it was over, she sat beside him, both of them breathing hard. Outside, the desert finally stilled. No gunfire, no wind, no vengeance left to chase. Eli looked toward the window, where dawn began to break pale and soft over the sand. "Sometimes," he murmured, "mercy's the hardest bullet to fire." Samantha leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a breath. "Then you already fired it." Morning came slow, like the desert had finally decided to breathe again. The wind that once howled with pain now drifted soft through the grass, carrying the scent of wet earth and ash. The storm had passed, or maybe it had simply moved on to test someone else. Samantha stood by the stove, stirring a pot of coffee that hissed and bubbled in the silence.
The cabin still smelled of gunpowder and smoke, but beneath it was something gentler, the faint sweetness of peace. She poured 2 cups and stepped outside. Eli sat on the porch, arm bound in clean linen, a thin line of sunlight resting across his boots. His face looked older in daylight, the kind of tired that only comes from surviving more than a man should. He watched the horizon in silence, as if expecting the night to change its mind and come back. Samantha handed him a cup. "It's hot," she said softly. He took it with his good hand, nodded once. "Hot's good. Reminds me I'm still here." They sat without speaking for a while. The desert stretched endless before them, gold, quiet, forgiving. A hawk circled high above, and from somewhere far off came the echo of running water, the kind Eli hadn't heard in months. Finally, Samantha broke the silence. "You could have left me there." Eli's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Thought about it. But you didn't." He looked down at the cup in his hand, watching the steam rise and fade. "Didn't know how to walk away from a voice calling my name." Samantha smiled faintly. "The wind, you mean?" "Maybe," he said.
Or maybe the Lord uses whatever He's got. The words hung there, quiet and real. She looked at him, the man who'd once built walls of silence to keep the world out, now sitting in open daylight, letting it in again. For a long while they just listened, to the creak of the porch, the rustle of sand, the slow pulse of a world still standing, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Then Samantha spoke again, her voice softer than the breeze. "What will you do now?" Eli took a long sip, eyes half closed. "Fix the roof, feed the horses, maybe see if this land's still worth living on." She looked down at her own hands, rough, bruised, but steady. "And if it isn't?" He turned to her, that faint ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Then we make it worth it." The light caught his eyes just right, and for a heartbeat she saw not the man who'd bled for her, but the man who'd forgiven himself. She rose and walked to the edge of the porch, the sun warming her face. The land stretched wide and silent, yet it no longer felt empty. Behind her, Eli's boots scraped against the boards as he stood, slow and careful. "You stayed," she said quietly. "Didn't know how to leave anymore," he replied.
A soft laugh escaped her, half joy, half disbelief. She turned to him, eyes bright against the morning light. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." He looked out at the horizon again. "Don't thank me yet. Desert's got a long memory. So do men like Reed." "Then we'll remember louder," she said. The line made him chuckle, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. It sounded strange and new, like the creak of a door opening after years sealed shut. Somewhere, a lark began to sing. The sound rose and fell with the wind, wrapping around the cabin like a blessing. Samantha leaned against the porch rail, closing her eyes. The sun touched her face. For the first time since the hanging tree, her hands didn't shake. Eli glanced at her, then at the sky. "For now," he said softly, "the desert's quiet." And for once, quiet didn't mean lonely. The sun was climbing now, slow and golden, painting the land in light that felt almost merciful. Smoke curled gently from the cabin's chimney, and for the first time in a long while, Eli Mercer didn't flinch at the sound of the wind. He sat back on the porch, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, watching Samantha move through the yard, her dress torn but her steps steady. Life had returned, quiet and simple, as if the desert itself had forgiven them both. And in that stillness, the story found its breath again. Maybe salvation doesn't come from miracles. Maybe it comes from the quiet kindness we give to one another, the small mercies that keep a soul from breaking when the world turns cruel. Eli once believed justice was the sound of a rifle. Now he knew better. Justice could also sound like forgiveness whispered through cracked lips, or the quiet resolve to stay when every instinct told you to run. He looked toward the horizon where the storm had once been. The sky there was clean now, washed by rain, by fire, by grace. Samantha's laughter drifted through the open door, light and unguarded. He closed his eyes for a moment and let it echo in the space where ghosts used to live. Because sometimes redemption isn't found in church walls or courtroom verdicts. Sometimes it rides in on the wind, carried by the simple act of not giving up on another human being. So tell me, partner, if you were Eli Mercer, standing in that rain-soaked night, would you have pulled the trigger or let mercy speak instead? Would you have chosen vengeance or faith that people can change, even when the world says they can't? Leave your thoughts on this Western tale in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please take a second to like the video and subscribe for more true Wild West stories, tales of courage, second chances, and quiet redemption. Pour yourself a cup of tea or maybe a late-night coffee. Take a breath and tell me, what time is it where you're listening from tonight?